We're talking about stories and short stories. The writer who is starting out, who is beginning to write, should understand the difference between a story and a short story. Now, we had begun our discussion on that subject in the previous session. Let's extend that discussion a little further. Now, stories have always been with us. Everybody makes stories. One might even say that to be human is to make stories. Just as we said that one of the things that distinguishes human beings from other forms is the ability to use language in a sophisticated way. In the same way, we can say that storytelling is what distinguishes human beings. Now, human beings tell many different kinds of stories. The stories can range from just a simple yarn or a piece of gossip or a joke, and slightly more extended anecdotes and tall tales. Tall tales are exaggerated stories. Now, all these are interesting forms for the writer, because in them you will find seeds for your writing. Now, we understand what a simple story is. A simple story is something that everybody tells. Now, a short story is different from just a story. As I said, stories have always been with us. We have always been making stories. But the short story is a relatively recently developed form. It has been developed in the Western world in the 19th and 20th century. So it has had a shorter history than either the novel or drama or poetry. And some of the names associated with the short fiction are relatively modern writers. Writers like Catherine Mansfield or Maupassant or Chekhov. Some novelists have also tried to write short stories. Two very well-known writers from the Third World, V.S. Naipaul and Salman Rushdie, have also written short stories. And so has Gabriel Marquez. Milan Kundera has also written short stories. So it is a form that most writers like to try. And I have suggested to you that as beginning writers, it is appropriate for you to try writing a short story first. And perhaps later, the short stories you have written, one or two, can be extended into a novel. So let's focus on short fiction or short story. I made the distinction between short story and short fiction in the previous segment. You should bear that in mind. Movie makers, filmmakers, they love short stories because short stories are brief, and films are 1 hour, 1.5 hour, 2 hours of length. And short stories can be read in one sitting. So it's a very appropriate form for a filmmaker. And recently I saw a very thought-provoking film by Anand Gandhi called Ship or Thesis, which has 3 short stories in it. Now when you watch the movie, you can immediately see that there are 3 segments, 3 short stories which have a unifying subject, unifying theme. That movie has gone on to win a lot of acclaim throughout the world, and it's worthwhile for you to have a look at that film. And you'll learn a lot about films, you'll learn a lot about short stories. Okay, you have started writing your short story, and that is our main business, to train you to write short stories. You have invented a character, and you have given the character some motivation. You have located the character in a particular place, and you have tried to evoke that place, to make that place real, and you have also evoked time. Now these three elements, we said, were the unifying elements in fiction. You have taken your character through a series of events. Some of the events are major events, some of them are minor events. Now, once you have done that, the next question you should ask yourself is questions relating to language. Now, I presume that you know enough about language now, that in your short story you are trying to look for metaphors, you are trying to create images, you are using some of the poetic devices in order to make your writing more effective. Poetic devices like alliteration, assonance. These are things which make your language literary, and they lift your language above just a simple narration or simple storytelling. Next question I want you to ponder on, pause and reflect on, is once you have got your story going, ask yourself, who is telling the story? As soon as you ask that question, you will see that a certain complexity comes into your thinking. Who is telling the story? You will say, of course, it is the author who is telling the story. Well, that is true. It is you. You are telling the story. But it is not always true, because you must see the author differently from the person who is telling the story. As you begin to write more, you will see that the voice that you hear when you read your own story is different in one story from another story. So what you are unconsciously creating is the persona in the story. It's useful to know that term. Instead of saying the author is telling the story, say the persona is telling the story. And each story has a persona, and the persona has certain characteristics, certain personality. The persona may be temperamental, quirky, maybe digressive. These are some of the aspects of the personality of the persona. Now, as we talk more about the method of narration, this will become clear to you. But think about it. Think about the person who is telling the story. Here you have to begin to be a little bit of a critic. The writer and the critic go together. And as we discuss more about writing, you will see the importance of being a critic of your own work. So, as a critic, begin to think about who is telling the story. Now, when you read stories, when you look at your own story, you will find that there are certain options for the writer. And one of the options is for the writer to assume omniscience. That is, to behave as if you are God. And like God, you are able to see everything, you are able to hear everything. You are able to dip into the mind of the main character, you are able to dip into the mind of the minor characters, you can go from place to place, you can travel over time, over past, present and future. Because you're God, you're behaving like God. Now, this is the simplest method of storytelling. And it's a method which most writers prefer. Now, omniscience has certain shortcomings, certain disadvantages. And one of the main disadvantages is that you lose credibility. The reader begins to ask questions. The critical reader begins to ask such questions as, how is it possible for the author to know everything? How is it possible for the author to be at all places at once? How is it possible for the writer to travel over time? You lose a little bit of plausibility or credibility with this method of narration. But it is a method that is universally preferred by many writers. So what are the other possibilities of storytelling? Now, as a critic, you will see that there are many other options. And one of the options is to invent a narrator. Now, you might make one of the main characters in your story the narrator, or you might pick a minor character to be your narrator. You might pick somebody who is an onlooker as your narrator. And it is the responsibility of the narrator to tell the story. Now, it becomes quite an intriguing and complex thing when your narrator is not a reliable person. Now, you can have reliable narrators, you can have unreliable narrators. Think of the possibilities if you have a narrator who is a compulsive liar, or a narrator who is absent-minded, a narrator who is semi-blind, he's not able to see everything. And your story becomes complex, and the question of truth and veracity becomes problematic. We will carry on this discussion of who tells the story in the subsequent segment.